welcome you to Memories, and thank you for coming. This is number 11 of our Memories sessions, and we're going to be talking about, or we're going to be learning about early New Meadows tonight. I'd like to introduce your panelists to you. We have Boyd Moore, we have Larry Bouck, June Harris Clay, and Glenn Carlock will be here momentarily. And we have our moderator, historian Dale Fisk from Council. And without any further talk from me, we would like you to welcome our panelists and Dale Fisk.
What I usually like to do is start out with each of the panel members and ask you to kind of give a little background on yourself and your connection to the area. So Boyd, why don't you start and kind of tell your background and when you arrived here now, and any background on ancestors that lived here or anything like that.
Well, my father was associated with Boise Payette Logging, and he came here with the company in 1940, I think.
What was his name?
Ted Moore. And in 1938, I'll back up a little bit, he had big thoughts of becoming a rancher again. He was raised on a ranch and he wanted to get back to it. So he had the opportunity to buy a small acreage in Montour, which is between Horseshoe Bend and Emmett. And so the family, myself and my two brothers and one sister, my mother, moved to the ranch, 15 acres. He had big hopes of buying some other ground that joined that. However, that was in 38. Along come 40, the land was still not available, and then come 41, war come along, so we abandoned the plan. But all this time he worked for the company. He stayed with the company from McGregor over here to New Meadows. And after the war started, my older brothers were cannon fodder, about that age, so they no longer was able to stick around and work the ranch if it should ever become one. So he abandoned that and we moved back up here. And so I came here in the fall of 42 was when I came into the valley. And
how old were you at that time?
At that time I was, I believe, 13 years old. Mm-hmm. So I was in the 7th grade. I finished my schooling here as far as I went, and left for a couple of years when I was in the service, and returned upon completing my hitch with Uncle Sam, and I've been here since. I was logged for a couple of years. After that, I went into the sawmill industry for another 2 or 3 years, and ended up in April of 58. I was appointed postmaster at the New Meadows Post Office, and was postmaster until 29th of December of 1990, a period of about 30 years. And then I've been enjoying retirement since.
Okay. How about you, Larry? You were telling me earlier some of your family history here and your background here.
Actually, I'm the 3rd generation on both sides, the Elkins and the Boucks. And the Elkinses lived down at Fruitvale, and my mother was a lifeguard down in the Starkey when she was 16 and lived in that area. And my grandfather worked on the highway department. And my dad, he was around 15 or so when they lived here in the Meadows. And they lived out where Carlocks live right now. They had a little acreage and a ranch out there, and he was they had 7 children. He was one of 7, and they lived there, and they tell, in fact, I got a picture that I found in his things that the night that the hotel burned down, down here at, they had hay stacked over where the Miller, well, it was Ray Miller and their shops and stuff. They had haystacks over there, and he said they got each one of the kids, all the kids had to get up on top of the haystacks when the hotel was burning down because they were afraid that sparks would fly and light the haystacks. So they had the kids up on top of the haystacks to beat the fires out if they had them. And he also, when he was 17 years old, he worked at down a pack string for Tom Morgan down at Black Bear Inn. And I got some pictures of him when he was down there packing at the Black Bear Inn. And he just was around the area for, and my mother and him got married here, and they lived a while in Brownlee, which is not over on the Brownlee we think of. It's the Brownlee down but by Sweet Nola, the old town of Brownlee. And he went to school here in, I've got pictures of him at Beaumont. He went to school here at Beaumont and graduated from the 8th grade here in Beaumont. And but he was around the area, and my grandmother moved here from Fruitvale, and she passed away when she was 93. She'd lived here all of her life, and my grandmother had moved away, but my dad had stayed here till about the last probably 8 years of his life, and moved, but he had stayed here and worked for J.I. Morgan here in New Meadows. And I had an older brother, and we both graduated from high school here. My brother graduated in '54, and I graduated in '62. But we were just been around the area, and then I worked for Shavers Incorporated since for 46 years. I started in high school, and I retired in February finally, and decided I wanted to do something different, and that was no work. So I've done that, and I just I still have an aunt and an uncle here in Meadows Valley, Warren and Tessie Osborne. That's my aunt and uncle, and it's my mother's sister, and they still live here in the valley. And so we have the opportunity. And then my aunt, Thelma Clark, lived here for a number of years. I moved her down to Caldwell, where I live. I had her in McCall when I was there, and she's down there now. She's 94, and she lived here all her life too, my dad's sister. So, and I was born in council and by Dr. Thurston, and as we talked, I went to Dr. Gerber and got my teeth beat out just like everybody else in the valley years ago. And and I was, my dad had a home. I grew up just down past the Idaho IOF Hall down there, and that's where we lived all my life. Was where I lived before I got married and moved away and to McCall and Cascade and that type area. But that's sort of my background on.
Tell me a little bit more about your dad's family. Was he born here?
No, he was born in Twin Falls.
Twin Falls.
And they moved here from Twin Falls. He had an older brother that got killed on a ranch they had down there, and they moved up here from Twin Falls. And they moved up here and stayed here for quite a while, and then my grandfather moved, and they went up around Spokane, Washington, and up there and stayed up there. But my aunts and uncles all lived in the area too. I mean, some of them stayed in the area, but most of them had moved away. But they had a lot of things, quite a number of pictures and information about about the valley that they used to do. My dad, he used to be sort of not a fire, they called him a firefighter, but he wasn't a firefighter. He had a horse, and he'd go up and volunteer. If there was a forest fire, you volunteered and you went up, and And he went up, rode up by Wallace's and up there one time, and they had a fire, and he was 19 years old, they said, and they remember him going up there and, you know, just around the valley and just being around here. And then my dad started he started a cable television company here. Was the first one in town before they started having satellites and that type of stuff. He bought it from Blake Hancock's son-in-law.
And when was that?
That was back in about 1957 or in that area. He put there was actually a cable system in here and also one in Riggins. He had them for a number of years. L&M stood for Larry and Myrtle, my mother and myself, cable company, and he'd done that while he also worked for Morgan. And he had that on the side and done that and done television work and that type of thing. Had a shop and sold it to Van Brethorst. What was it? Von Brethorst. They had a television. He took corresponding courses through the mail and stuff and learned how to repair televisions and stuff and that type of stuff, and had that business on the side and done that for, you know, too, and things. And done that and put a lot of televisions in the area, you know, because it was hard to get television here. And I remember we went out and he had and I can't remember now who it was. It was one of the Barnes boys that would climb trees. And I remember we went out to George Hurd's place, and I was just a kid, and we had rope, and we had to put the stuff in a rope, and he'd pull it up, and the guy would climb the tree.
What,
you know,
put an antenna?
Put an antenna up, you know, and then string it down and stuff. And I remember they went out to also, he put one out to the top of the Circle C, old Homestead house, too. I remember that. And just, you know, just around and things, and it was sort of neat. And
well, while we're on the subject, tell me a little bit more about this cable system. That's something I'd never heard of. That seemed like pretty early to be.
Yeah, he had a cable, and all you get was 2 channels, channel 2 and channel 7. He had he had an antenna, a couple different antennas, and he had it all around. It was actually cable around, and then you paid so much a month to hook up to it, and he had it all over town. And in the town, if I recall, it was around 300 people that was hooked up to it, because that's basically about the only time you could get a good television reception.
So basically, he had an antenna and he was feeding the signal.
Yeah, feeding, and they had boosters around through the community. I don't know if you guys remember that when they had that, and he had that around, and then he'd have little boosters around, and then he eventually went out on top of the out by the junkyard, you know, or out here, and put some antennas a little higher up, for he could get a better reception and as time went on. And then he turned around and they come in with the repeaters, you know. And he sold the company just before that, sold it to a company out of Pullman, Washington.
Do you remember about when that was that he sold?
About in about in 61.
Yeah.
And then at that time they started doing the repeaters off the hills, and he sold it to this company, and then he sold the one in Riggins to him also. He had one in Riggins. Then he sold that to them, and they, of course, the first thing, the repeaters come in and people could pick it up with rabbit ears, you know, or good antennas, well, everything. But one thing Dad always did, he was always very cautious what he did. Well, they'd done that, and so when he sold out, he also sold a franchise for 100 years from Meadows Valley. And they did win a lawsuit against the television channels in Boise, because he did have a franchise, which was really touchy at those times, but he did have a franchise, and they did have to go out of business. So, and then I had to lease all the power poles. You know, he had to pay so much for each power pole per year, and he had a contract with Idaho Power.
Yeah.
That they hung the cable on the power poles.
Yes. And then in Riggins, when he put in Riggins, and he done a lot of work like in slow off times with loggers and stuff. loggers that were run on unemployment things helped him, the local here that he knew went down and helped him put in the system down there at work. They buried 7 miles of cable. He made a cable system, and they buried 7 miles of cable from up, I can't remember the name of the guy's name, there where they used to have the teepees in the Riggins. And they went up there and they buried it down to there, and then they started going along the poles and stuff, and then and he had to have a guarantee of so many people in Riggins before he put it in. And they put it in, and a lot of the loggers and guys that he knew from Morgan's went down and would work and get extra money and stuff when he put it in. So.
Well, June, how about giving us a little background on your family and you, and when the first people in your family arrived here?
Oh, we weren't nearly as old as the Boucks. Dad started working for Boise Payette in about 1937. He went to the camp areas. We stayed in either Emmett or Horseshoe Bend, and then spent the summers with him wherever they were working, back to either Horseshoe Bend or Emmett to go to school. We moved to New Meadows the spring of 1942. He was still with Boise Payette, and he worked for Boise Payette or Jack Morgan, Boise Cascade for his entire life then. We lived here in New Meadows, started school when we moved up from Emmett. Beaumont was the first school I went to. Graduated from the 8th grade. I do believe I was in the 4th grade when we finally moved up. Then went to Meadows Valley High School and graduated in 1949 along with Boyd Moore, Dick Clay, George Fitz, Fay Steckman, Norma Rich, Geneva Lee, Don Wisdom, Walter Ratzik. There were 15 of us that graduated in 49. I went to Boise and was married and had 2 children. Moved over to Weiser 2.5 years ago, and started visiting with my old classmate Dick Clay, and here we are married.
So when you arrived here, what are some of your memories of how the town was different than it is now, as far as buildings or just anything that's changed over the years?
Well, it's very interesting to look at the maps back here, and the minute we saw the maps and the listings, we all remembered so many things that we had forgotten. There's a few things, or a couple of things, that I remember that isn't pigeonholed in there. One of them was George Fitz bought the drugstore from, was his name Ed?
That was Herb Fitz.
Herb Fitz, yeah, Herb Fitz. What's his name? Ed Knopf.
Which building is it you're talking about? What number on there?
6, I think it is.
He was a pharmacist, I know, but he owned the building, I don't know that.
Number 6.
Number 6?
We remember him from way back, and then later on, LaFay and Alice Widner, that lineup was right. It was a lazy little town. It was laid back, and it was a fun town to grow up in. Close neighbors, close friends.
Must have been a lot of loggers. I mean, that's when, about the time, well, I think Boise
Yeah.
Payette moved here in 1939 and
Yeah.
40, so it'd be pretty much right after that.
Well, yeah, we lived down in Company Town for many a year. My brother and brother-in-laws, my father, everybody was a logger or a rancher. There wasn't anything else much. I don't have specific memories until we get to talking about different things, and Boyd and I hit on a couple of things while ago along with Nick Clay that we all remembered after one person would mention it, but I just don't have anything off the top of my head.
What about when you were a kid? Were there stores that you went into and remember what this, to buy candy or anything like that, that you, what were the stores
Yeah.
like?
Old-fashioned, when I think about them now, the first store I can remember shopping at, groceries. Hugh Crabtree had a grocery store, and long before Shavers went in, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was way before.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And then, as an offshoot from that, I think Sullivan put in a dry goods store.
Yeah. And they brought the merchandise out of Stibnite,
They did, you're right. Yeah.
because we still had some of it 2 years ago.
What kind of merchandise was that?
Like wading boots, those type of things, a lot of real heavy. I mean, they weren't like the irrigating boots we have, you know, that you sell now. They were real heavy. They had irrigating boots and a lot of different things like that that they moved. And that was from Frank Callender's store, because Frank Callender was a partner in that store. And
Well, wasn't that, those boots that you're talking about, wasn't it something like Army surplus is now? And
yeah, it was. And it was very,
wasn't
very
it?
heavy. It was
Yeah.
real, very heavy.
So where was that store at?
Down there where Shaver's store is right now. On that corner. Crabtree had it, and
Crabtree was up here, closer to the depot.
yeah, he had one
Yeah.
right in that little place there.
Yeah.
Which now is load and shoot, isn't it?
Part of the, yeah, yeah.
Where the load and shoot is, and yeah,
Barbecue,
Sagebrush.
sagebrush,
the sagebrush, yeah. The sagebrush is what they call it now, rather than load and
Yeah.
shoot.
So Larry,
That was the first little Crabtree store that I remember, but he was working for Calendar.
Yeah, and they went up and he'd had some stuff in that store after, and then Raleigh McGregor, or Raleigh McGordon.
McGordon,
In fact, I just saw Raleigh 2 weeks ago. Raleigh lives in Cascade. And, yeah, and then he was in there for a while, and then he built the store down across from the drugstore, and then there was 3 days before it opened, it burned down. And where the cafe and that type of stuff was.
Yes, I
And,
remember that.
so what's the progression from the time you're talking about up till Shavers, and when did Shavers take over?
Shavers took over that store in about 1949.
Really?
Well, now Shavers, he had a store before that though, up on where the,
Yeah,
where
but he-
Brown's at now.
Yeah, they had a store there, and then he purchased the one and closed that one down.
Yeah.
49, and that's,
About 49, yeah. He left here in 1953 and took over Boise Wholesale and Dry Goods in Boise and moved his office down in 1953.
was
And
this one of his first businesses?
This was his first private-owned store. All the other stores were company-owned. And then he purchased the company back in about 74.
What company was that?
Boise Wholesale and Dry Goods,
Really?
out of Boise.
Okay. Well, Boyd, what are some of your early memories of the town and some of the businesses and some of the business people that you remember?
Well, I want to tell you the first winter I spent here in the valley, that would have been in the winter of '42. When my family decided to move from Montour, they did it rather quickly, so they didn't have a house available over here at Boise Payette, over in Morgantown. So we get to looking around for a place to live, and it wasn't about like today, nothing available. And he got to talking with, I believe, Jim Witherspoon that owned it. There was a Pullman car sit right here where Libby's building is today. And we spent the first winter here as a family in that Pullman car. And that was an experience.
How did you heat it?
Very tough. One end at a time.
Did you have a wood stove?
Wood stove on both ends, and the middle stayed cold. I remember kind of a cold winter, but maybe it was just because in that place.
What was the car doing there in the first place?
You know, I never got the story of why it was moved. Of course, the railroad, the spur of the railroad was right here. As I recall, maybe over here about to the end of this building is where a spur ran down. So for some reason or another, they moved it from here over across the road and set it down. Somebody bought it. Now, I think it was perhaps some of the Witherspoon family, but I think that he negotiated with Jim, and that's who we rented from for the first winter. And in the spring, a house did become available there in Morgantown, or at that time, Boise Payette House, and we moved there.
How long did that Pullman car stay there? Was it just a couple of years?
No, it was there for many years
Forever.
after that.
Really?
I really don't remember when it was moved, but the only thing I do remember, it was moved from that spot down there beside the Witherspoon family home.
Yeah, we're right beside his mother's house.
Yeah.
So was it lived in by other people over the years
They
as
lived
well,
in
or
it.
I just can't tell you that. I do not remember. I guess it was very vivid when I lived there, but I don't know if it was inhabited by other people or not after we left, after we moved out.
And didn't he move that right behind, and then he had a big building, and he run the stage line from here to Weiser, wasn't it? Had those buses and stuff, and didn't...
At one time he did.
Yeah, and he had that car set behind that building down there, right behind that building that he built for them buses to park in for a number of years.
Well, I don't remember that. I didn't remember he even had a building for his buses.
Yeah,
but,
he had
very well could have,
building
because
down
he
there.
did have the bus line from New Meadows, Meadows Valley to Weiser and return.
where was the bus station at?
I think he was conjunction with old Scotty McDonald up here on the corner. That would be right about where the two big ugly buildings are up here.
Oh,
Two new buildings.
The one furthest to the east was where the old Davenport Cafe sat, or very close to that.
Where would that be on the map? Close to what number?
Where McDonald's were. Try to,
Well, I don't know here.
I think that is the top of the map south, or
Well, it was right across the street from
Cook's.
from
service station.
Cook's on that side, and then the
Grace
vacant
Campbell.
lot and the
The
Campbells.
now this was a
Okay, it had been here where the number 19 Roy Davenport Restaurant. They then became Ida and Scotty McDonald's Bus Depot and restaurant. That's being
Those
19.
Davenports was Mrs. Hagan's mother.
yes.
Yeah,
That was the Davenport.
yeah, it was the Davenports.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the history on that spot there in that building? It was a store before
It was a restaurant prior to being the bus depot. It was a restaurant operated by Davenport, I can't remember the
Roy,
first
wasn't
name.
it?
Roy, and
I can't remember.
I would know her name if you'd say it. I'd say that you were right.
a little help around here.
It's all right.
So,
Ethel,
Yeah, that's what I,
Was it Ethel?
Roy and Ethel Davenport. And after they sold to Ida and Scotty McDonald.
were Davenport's the operators of that when you guys were kids?
Yeah.
You don't remember
No,
anybody?
not when I first moved here in '42. McDonald, I think, had taken it by then. I think maybe right about
Very,
that time.
yeah, it was,
Davenport's
I can
lived here
remember.
after that quite a while, and lived just down the street, right
yeah,
down here
because
and on the right-hand
we
side.
lived in their house for a while when I was just about in the 8th grade.
But that was a bus depot when I came to
Yes.
the area. Had the
Well, it was a little restaurant, a home-style restaurant when the Davenports had it. I remember them there.
So when it was a bus station, did he continue a restaurant of any kind? or-
yes, yeah, they had a restaurant and the bus depot and restaurant combined. Now, prior to McDonald's, I don't know, did the Davenports have the bus depot there as well?
I don't
Do you know?
believe so. I think Witherspoon was I think the only buses we had was what Witherspoon had, wasn't it? Or did we have the other buses coming up? I don't remember them.
I think, as I recall, Witherspoon and his venture was later than, for some reason, the bus line was from Lewiston to Boise, but they didn't have any bus running down 95, so
That's where
Jim
Witherspoon came in.
he come in and started his little bus line that ran from New Meadows to Weasel
Yeah.
and back down 95 because the trailways came up from Boise on 55 around and right on up 95 to Lewiston. That was a regular trailways bus line.
Well, since you guys are all here during the war years, or mid-war years anyway, on what was New Meadows like then as far as rationing, or were there many men around, things like that?
Lots of rationing. My mother took in boarders of the loggers that their wives couldn't move up here, and they didn't have a cookhouse at that time. So we took in boarders, and I can remember they had to give her their sugar coupons for her to bake for their lunches and desserts. Tires, everything was rationed. If you owned a car, you couldn't go anywhere because the doggone tires were worn out and you couldn't get more. Or the gas was rationed and you couldn't get gas. Everything that I can remember that was important was rationed.
How much did gas cost at that time?
Well, not much. What was it, a quarter? We were talking about that the other day. Was it a quarter,
I don't
a
know, but
gallon?
I would just guess probably about a quarter.
It seems like somebody was at the house and we were talking about it. I do believe it was a quarter a gallon.
Which that stayed at that price for many, many years.
But our fathers weren't earning all that much
No.
money
They're
either.
making $1 a day if they're
Yeah.
lucky.
Really, in the 40s?
No, it was more than that, I think.
Pardon?
It was more than that, I
Not
think.
very much it was. Oh, $1 a day, I'm sorry, $1 an hour.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
what I meant to
okay.
say. Yeah, I'm sorry. That was in, back in the Depression area, they was working for
Yes.
$1 a day.
Yes, you're right.
I don't know how tough it was. I was born in '43, so a little late.
Now, I remember when I was a junior, I believe, in high school. I got a job out at the sawmill in Tamarack during the summer months. And there was a little bit of construction going on in the area at that time. I think Tony Marazzo out here building a highway and putting in a bridge, and some of the high school kids got a job working for him, and I know they was making 75 cents an hour, and I thought, my golly, those guys really hit a bonanza.
Yeah.
And I stumbled onto a job there in Tamarack driving straddlebug, or a lumber carrier, for $1 an hour. And I tell you, I was the king of the whole hill.
Well, my first job was with Myrtle Day at the phone company. I run the little old switchboard over here, and they paid me $0.25 an hour. My gosh, I was 12 years old when I did that. I was in the money.
Now that building today is
Well, it's
right over here on
back.
Back where gardeners lived.
where Butch Gardner lives.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, the building is still.
the building is gone.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
where the switchboard
There's
was?
a switchboard there.
Yeah, the little
right there
tel-
where
and-
Butch Gardner's house is today.
And where is that? Can you describe that?
That is, see, this is commercial. It's over on, is it Miller?
Right down from the depot on this side.
Right on this street here by the lumber yard, right over to the next street over, right there on the
Well, where
corner, right on
Campbell's
the right
was.
there.
Cat corner.
Was it a
Yeah.
residence and a...
It was a residence and a switchboard.
And the liquor store.
Really?
Good combination.
Who was it that lived there?
Myrtle Day.
And did she run?
She did. She lived there. She was a sister to the Beans. Harry Bean owned the telephone lines from Sweet and Ola and Horseshoe Bend and up through here, and
Privately owned.
privately owned, yeah. She was a Bean, and she had three youngsters, I think, Marlis, Lorraine, and Rex Day.
And when you say privately owned, it wasn't a Bell, part of the Bell system or anything?
No.
Just,
Harry Bean owned it,
uh-huh.
yeah.
How many lines or how many phones were there in town?
Oh, probably, I would say at that time less than 100
Yeah.
when I learned to run the
And when,
board.
was this in the 40s you're talking about, or? Yeah.
Probably 40, maybe 45.
Yeah. What was the procedure like as far as calling? Were people on party lines in town? And they'd have to call the operator to get
Ring.
anybody? Or
Yeah, ring the operator.
Yeah.
She would connect with the plugs
Uh-huh.
and then ring the other phone.
Yeah.
Your phone rang long and two shorts, or two shorts and a long, and three longs, four shorts,
How many people would be on one line?
probably several, from the clicking on the phone lines.
You didn't talk about your
Nobody ever listened in,
No,
did they?
no, you didn't talk about your neighbors.
No.
No.
Do you remember about how many lines there were? And how would there be like one plug for each line that you would change over?
You have sets of plugs,
Uh-huh.
and you answer with one. You have two plugs, two rows of plugs, and then two rows of keys. You answer with one plug, you ring with an adjacent plug, and you use your keys to ring.
So each key would be a different type of ring or something?
No, you control the rings.
Yeah.
They would pull forward for a ring, and you would gauge your own ringing, a long or a short or whatever.
Now, did they have operators 24 hours a day, or is that a stupid question?
Well, no, yeah, Myrtle was there, somebody was there 24 hours a day. She might have been in bed.
Yeah.
But she'd turn up the alarm, and if it rang at night, emergency, it'd wake her up.
Was that a different ring, the emergency ring?
No, it was just a louder ring.
Yeah.
Then you'd turn it up or down if you were sitting at the board, or if you were awake cooking a meal, or whatever.
Yeah. Huh. So, what hours did you work, or what were the main hours that the switchboard would be
She
open?
probably opened at 7 o'clock in the morning. When I first started training, I was in school. I was just a kid. And I would work after school or on the weekends, or if she was wanting to go out for an evening, I would run over and take over. We locked the door at 10 o'clock, and you couldn't come in and make a phone call from the office after that. The calls were accepted all night, but usually people didn't call unless it was really important.
Yeah.
An emergency of some kind.
How busy was it during the day mostly?
Not busy.
Not very.
No, not very.
Yeah. So did the company own the telephones as well, I suppose?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The lines and the phone.
And they would probably rent them or lease them to people, the phones?
Everybody would rent their phone, pay their phone bill, and their long distance accordingly. I think the first phone bill we got was something like $6 a month, and that was everything.
Yeah. How long did that type of situation continue, that private company and the switchboard? Do you remember?
I don't think he sold the company. I went on and worked in McCall for him on a different type of board. They were modernizing all of the time. Then I also managed the Horseshoe Bend office after I got married. He had it until probably, probably in the late 60s or 70s.
In that same building, or?
No.
In McCall.
No, it moved to McCall, and everything was run out of McCall office.
When was that move was made?
Oh, gosh.
Well, I don't know. Long time.
Okay, I don't know.
50s, 60s?
50s.
50s?
I'd say in the 50s.
And after that move, do you remember, were people in New Meadows still on party lines, I suppose?
For a while. They were slowly getting more and more private lines, but it took a long time.
Yeah.
Several years.
Yeah. Larry, I wanted to ask you, it's a little off the subject, but about the town of Brownlee. Was that on Brownlee Creek, I suppose?
Up Old and Sweet there. You go up at across there at Gardena.
Yeah.
Go across the river and you go up there. There was a little community up there.
Up in the hills there? How far from Highway 55 was it?
Oh, probably 25, 27 miles.
Really? Is there anything left there today?
A few things. In fact, yeah, I know my aunts come here from Spokane, and they went there, and the old barn, some of it was still standing where my folks had. And I went through my dad's pictures and stuff, and some things I found. And they raised chickens first. They had a bunch of chickens. They raised chickens up there. His family did. And then when he got married, he decided he needed to upgrade. Well, they had all this chicken wire around, and for the chickens. He decided to upgrade and go turkeys. He could make more money. Well, they forgot to tell him turkeys hung themselves. in the wire, and it lasted about a week and a half, and all these turkeys were hung themselves, stick their necks to the fence,
Must
and
eat
it
'em.
was the chicken wire, and they couldn't get their heads back out.
Must eat a lot
So
of
then he
turkeys.
went to work, and then he decided he better come and go logging, come back to Meadows Valley.
You know, right outside of it, Brownlee, up on that hill where the old cemetery is, they're still burying people up there.
Yeah.
I went to
Oh, yeah.
a funeral about a year ago, a year and a half
Yeah,
ago.
there's still people up there.
And yes, desolate, it's not taken care of. But they're still burying up there.
Yeah.
It's about time for a break, so we'll take a brief break here, and I'd like the audience members to think of a few questions about the town and some things after the break. So we'll come back in a bit.
Boats.
Yeah? Which side of the lake was it on?
It was on the side of the, be on the council side.
The west?
And there was something else going, so anyway, that was a Lost Lake.
Well, you know, George Green had a place where he rented boats when I was like in
I
the
was still an operator
early
too.
60s. Would that have been the
After
same
I
place?
was-
And I was
There
working
was
in
two players,
53.
one on the other side. Here's
Elsie Davis,
I was told, are you caretaker of the cemetery still?
Yeah, I'm the clerk.
Yeah. What do you know about the cemetery or some of the interesting graves or anything out there? Any stories out there? 'Cause-
Well, we create quite a few, but other than that,
Let's go out there when it's dark and creepy.
How old is that cemetery?
it's not very old. The oldest grave out there that is documented is 1886.
Yeah. Is there an older grave site or anything in the valley that you know of?
Not that we're aware of.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's a lot of burials around the valley, but they're not documented.
Yeah. Huh.
And the oldest graves out there are not documented.
Really?
So the story goes that that cemetery was created when the Wilson family came to the valley. And what year that was, I don't know. But the hired hand that they brought, I know whether he came with them from Scotland or whether they picked him up around here somewhere, I don't know. But he fell off the barn while they were building the barn and broke his neck. So they needed a place to bury the poor fellow, and they looked around and found a hill, you know, out there to the little south of the place. So they said that'd be a good spot, and supposedly that's the first grave, and that grave is not documented.
It's just an oral history handed down type of thing? Huh. So the first documented grave you said was 1886?
86.
Yeah. And who was that, you know? Do you remember anybody significant or?
An old family, but they're not here now, and I cannot recall what that name is. There was an old, there's several of the family that's buried there. I'd have to go get my book to get a name for that.
But it's still a current cemetery, still burials going on out
Oh,
there,
yeah,
right?
oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it's the only one in the valley, I guess.
That's the only cemetery between here and Riggins, actually.
Yeah.
But there again, there's a lot of burials down here along the Salmon River, especially in the area just this side of I'm just about to become a blank here. Down there, remember the,
Pollock or the county line?
well, it's on this side of Pollock there, there's
Pinehurst?
the
Or,
Pinehurst area, that's what I'm trying to think of. In that area there, I'm quite sure that there's burials in that area, but
Yeah.
now they're not, as far as I know, they're not documented.
what makes you think there are graves there?
Oh, just the stories that you've heard, you know, the old guys that gets blown away way back when they were a little rough and tough, and haul him up on the hill and plant him.
Yeah. Well, Larry, let's since we're up at that end of the valley, let's talk about the Black Bear Inn and some of that things you were talking about, the Spanish. And
Okay, well, as I mentioned earlier, and then something else that they said I should mention too is my dad was mayor of Meadows for a while too here. Can't remember how many years, but he was mayor here in town for a number of years. So, but anyway, in the Black Bear Inn, and that's why I'm interested in that end of the valley. My dad used to take me hunting in there all the time, and he had done pack strings for Tom Morgan and back in when he was a kid, and he had when I went hunting there was a couple different things that he had told me that, you know, and I can't document them, you know, it's things that he had told me, and told me about the years and different things. But there was one place that he showed me that he said, I want to show you these, and I spent like 50 years ago, and I finally went back down there, and Dawn and I did, and I felt I found the area again. On the Salmon River itself, down in that area, and I'm going to go to the Historical Society before I, you know, and let them handle it. But there was a place there that he showed me that had 3 dugouts, and it had timbered roofs on them at that time. And they were starting to cave in pretty good, you know. And
this was when you were a kid?
This was when I was a kid. I was about 14 or, you know, in that range, 13 maybe. And he told me that the story that the old guy that was at Black Bear Inn had told him that was where the Spanish held up one winter. That they were coming back from the Riggins area, they'd been that far hunting gold. And that they'd held up on there and they built these caves type things overlooking the Meadows Valley and the river and stuff on account of it was high enough for the water, plus they could see Indians and that type of stuff. And that they had those there. And he had showed me those, and you know, and I just, you know, often wondered, you know, about it. So anyway, I went back and I feel found the location that where it was, and so I'm going to find out who to get a hold of and how to, that they need to maybe proceed with that. And I know he told me that also in, I think it was in 1953, that, and there was an article apparently appeared in one of the Statesmen, that's what he told me, that some fellow, and this area is up above, he went up above and you could go up on top of the mountain and you could see down into, actually, I call it Stinky Hot Springs, you know, down there, and that was what they used to call it. And up on top of there, that's where he used to pack. That's where they used to take hunters. And he said that it was in 1953 that somebody had got lost in there, and it was very foggy because that water from that hot springs comes plumb up on that mountain. They pipe it plumb across the river to there.
Are you talking about Starkey?
Yeah, not Starkey.
No.
The one down here at Riggins.
Oh, up the Salmon River from...
No. The one just
below Round Valley, yeah.
Yeah, just below Round Valley. Just as you break in, there's a hot springs there. But I used to call it Stinky.
Stinky Hot Springs.
Yeah.
Stinky
Yeah,
Lake.
that's what I've always called it.
Stinky Lake.
Yeah,
Stinky Lake?
yeah. And anyway, there's a swimming pool and stuff there.
Uh-huh.
That water comes from up, and it's quite steamy up in that area because of the old pipe and different things. But a hunter claims that he got lost up in there in '53, and that he run across a Spanish cannon that was in the overgrown in, you know, the brush and that type of stuff. And but he was lost, and they claimed that he went back up in that area and they never could find it. But there was an article in the Statesman, my dad said about it. And and then on beyond there, and I can't remember the name of the hill, the camels maybe could tell me, they went up in that area. But plumb up on top, there's a ridge up there that's got trenches about this deep. Do you know where that is, Larry, up in there? Plumb up on top. Up on top of that ridge. I don't know what the ridge is, but it's plumb up back of Stinky up just as you're going down into the Salmon River area. about the last big break. You come off there and there's no trees or anything. It's just,
Pollock Mountain?
no, it isn't Pollock.
It'd be between Boulder and
Yeah.
Lake.
Yeah, it's in between there. And anyway, up there was trenches, and they were about 2.5 feet deep and about 6 feet wide. And there was about 30 yards of those. And it was coming more this way. And anyway, the old guy that my dad worked with up there told him that that was where they drug and trees and stuff, breaking cannons of Spanish when they come back from the Riggins area down in the Salmon River when they're looking for gold. And that sort of ties in with the where they were down around Salmon River and stayed, some of them during the winter.
So you're talking about that where they would anchor something to keep the cannons from rolling?
Rolling and going down, and there's about a 30-yard area up there, and it was, you know, deep and about maybe 5 foot, 6 foot wide, just one area, and just coming down like, you know how you drag thing they used to do on wagons and stuff, and that's area there, and that's what that guy had told my dad. That's what he had been told.
Yeah.
And, you know, so you don't know those things, but...
And you were talking about Indians coming up here, or some of the Nez Perce?
Nez Perce Indians used to, and I know a lot of these people, I've seen them years too, used to come out to the hot springs. When I was a kid, they used to come up every summer and be along the creek out there and in the mud. And I don't know whether, does anybody else remember the Indians ever coming up here?
Yeah.
And anyway, they were from the Nez Perce tribe, and they used to come up here. And a neighbor of my folks, which a lot of you know, Taylor Smith. You ever remember Taylor Smith and Bell? Well, when I was a kid, I'd go over there and visit with him and stuff. Well, those Indians, there were some women that would always come to his house. So when they would come up here, so I would go over and visit with him and you know, and stuff. And they knew him when he was a youngster. He was the first white baby born in the fort up at Grangeville. And he knew those Indians from way back when he was small. They used to come and visit with him, and they said that they remember when they were small, they used to come up here, their families would come up here and fish for salmon. And they've been coming up every year and going to these mud things, and they used to fish for salmon, but they didn't anymore. But they'd come up, and they used to come out there in the summer. You'd see a lot of them out there along the river, and they'd camp and in those hot mud deals for every summer they'd come up.
Well, you mentioned mud several times. What's the mud?
Just the hot water around the edge of the creek, river, little Salmon River.
Interesting.
They'd come up there every year. I remember them for years coming up here, and they'd see them out there. And
they used to sell leather stuff and so forth that they made.
Gloves and stuff like that.
Boots.
We can backtrack here to that question, who that first burial was. It was William Macomsey. Macomsey. And I think maybe Larry might have heard something or knew of a Macomsey ranch around here. Did you, Larry?
It was Osborne's. What Osborne has now, Macomsey's.
Which,
3 brothers.
so they were one of the early settlers here in the
That's the
valley.
1886 grave.
He was buried in 1886. Of course, some of the rest of the family was, well, much later.
Do you have any idea how many graves were there before that documented one? Does anybody have any idea?
Before when?
Before 1886, do you have any handle on how many
I
graves?
have no, not at all, really.
Okay.